Welcome back to the 10-year anniversary party here in Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to talk about tape music, Microsound, music concrete, and the Morphagene. And I have with us Tom Erbe. Yes, Richard Devine. And Walker Farrell.
Hello. It's on now. Yep.
And I thought it would be great if we could start with the person who has the most history with Microsound, Tom.
Yeah.
Here in this group,
Yeah.
you have the most history with it.
Okay, so
And it'd be great if you could explain some of your past.
being a good academic, I prepared a PowerPoint and we have a projector. If you go to soundhack.com, you can download it and follow along. But I'll rely on a few audio examples. I've been working in studios for a long time. I always gravitated towards experimental music, which it's what I wanted to do. In 1989, I probably had my first real intimate contact with music concrete, and that was working with James Tenney. He had a piece that he composed in 1960 called Collage Number 1, and it's a piece where I know he was excited about tape music. He was also excited about Elvis Presley, and what he wanted to do was put the energy of both together. And so I'm going to play a little excerpt here. Okay, I'm going to stop right there before the reveal. But to me, this excerpt's important because you don't know Elvis Presley's there. You've totally obscured what's happening. And the edits are so fast that the rhythm of his cutting, of his splicing, has taken over the piece. Right after that, or rather. Okay, so this piece couldn't be published for years, of course. So this tape went around in sort of the underground, cassette underground, reel-to-reel underground in the 60s. Finally got published when they cleared the rights, when sampling became a thing and the state realized, oh, maybe we should do that. So beyond that, I'm going to move to 1991, and I'm going to follow my own PowerPoint here. I got very interested in spectral audio. And with spectral audio, you're not only cutting up things into little cells in time, not only just little grains in time, but you're also cutting it up into frequencies. So I thought this was a marvelous thing. It was something that was being done on mainframes at UCSD where I was working. I left UCSD and ended up in a school with very little budget, Mills College, but we did have a Mac II SI. And as soon as I could program that computer, I thought, okay, I'm going to bring these mainframe things to the PC. And this was a software called SoundHack that I created. It was published in 1991, so it's quite a ways ago. It will not work as of this year because Apple is abandoning 32-bit. But one of the first things I did was convolution, which is taking all these cells and taking them from two sounds and just multiplying them. This was a complex multiply where you're taking phase and amplitude, but you could get these really interesting hybrid sounds. That was a convolution of a Christian Marclay record called Footsteps, which was all footsteps and also the marks of people stepping on the record, and me just fast forwarding through a CD player. And for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to try to get as much sort of grain-like texture as possible without having computers that could do it in real time. Oh, by the way, that probably took me 3 hours to compute in 1991. The next thing I did, or about the same time, I implemented this other grain technique called the phase vocoder, where you, and everyone's done this now, where you do a time stretch based on smearing the grains, interpolating between them, and with the phase vocoder, you're also interpolating the phase, so you get this wonderful continuity. And here I'm going to play two things. First, a short little sax solo, which you probably won't identify it. And after that, it's going to be stretched 32 times, and you get something completely different. Sound is 11 minutes long, so I'll stop that there. It's very easy to make 100-minute long sounds. I soon realized something about tool building too when I made this. When this got distributed, I heard so many people making the 10-minute long, I've stretched the words world peace out 10 minutes, and this is my piece. And I did go to one festival where I heard my software over and over. So what I learned was, don't make it too easy to make a great sound. In fact, give people a lot of knobs and make them accessible so they can do them in real time. These are good things. I did one final thing with SoundHack, and that's this morphological mutation functions. Here, my idea was I was going to take the sort of 70s idea from Xenakis, from Herbert Brun, to take stochastic methods, random methods, and put them into spectral techniques. This one is a guitar and flute morphed together. Okay, it sounds cool, but I realized I was getting in too deep. There was too much complexity, and I no longer really had control over the process. The sounds were actually dominating my process, and it was no longer my structure I was putting on it. So we abandoned that, and we realized non-real-time methods could only go so far. You can only pre-plan so much. I am going to take an aside, though. 1994, I made a program with the worst title ever, Corn Bucket. This was a thing that I just was working in C sound. I needed to make thousands of notes to do granular synthesis, so that's what this did. It just made thousands and thousands of notes, and then I could play them together. This is a granularization of Vic Damone doing the Hawaiian Wedding Song, and Hazel Atkins doing No More Hot Dogs. You won't hear it. We stayed with Vic for a while. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead much further. I made a lot of plugins from about 1999 to current, made about 20 of them. 2 of them touched rather heavily onto granular synthesis. One of them is called Bubbler. It's a granular delay, it's free. And I just wanted to do everything you could do with granular delay. It's the plugin where I have the absolute most number of controls on it. I decided to never go over 15 again. And one other plugin called Spiral Stretch, where I use both granular and phase vocoder methods to do time stretching. And I'll play 2 quick examples of that. Oops, new live patch.
I still use these too, even to this day.
for the gap. Just a little bit of flute, and now through the granular delay. And back again. And now a little bit of guitar. And here through the stretch. So with these plugins, I could do granular time stretches, but it's happening in real time, which doesn't make sense. But what I was able to do is make multiple sort of time stretches that overlay each other, and then give me this really nice cloud of sound. So this brings me almost up to date. Stop that. Maybe, yeah. It is stretching it. There we go. In 2012, I decided to go backwards, and I went back to 1952 to the second music concrete piece made in the US called Williams Mix by John Cage. This is a piece that was actually scored. I mean, a lot of electronic music, there's no score, so once Richard composes it, it's performed by Richard. Do you make scores? Okay.
That might change.
That might change. You might be able to perform a Richard Devine piece. Now, John Cage made a score for this tape music piece, but his idea of the score was to just put images of all the tape splices. So he has, it's in real size, not real time, real size. So you see the whole piece as 8 tape layers with all the splices, and you can look online to see a picture. I'll show you afterwards. No one did it after John Cage. He put it on score. It's 192 pages of score. Each page represents 4 minutes or 1.3 seconds. The whole piece is 4 minutes and 15 seconds. It would be 4:16, except there's a rest at the end. And I decided to do it. I just thought, this is a score. People should perform this piece, and people shouldn't be afraid. And I heard a lot of people being afraid, and I thought, people can watch all about Battlestar Galactica, and it's not that impressive to watch that much TV, but to do 192 pages of music, that's crazy, right? So I thought, okay, we got to do that. And so I made my own version of Williams Mix, and I wanted to know, is it still the same piece? It was quite different. It had all these high frequencies you didn't hear before. I did have a lot of friends contribute the sounds for this piece, so it's not just my piece, but I'll play another little excerpt. Okay, that's enough of that.
Can I ask you a question, Tom?
Yeah.
Is the stereo element of that part of the score too?
It's actually for 8 tape machines, or 8
Oh, okay.
speakers. Actually, it's scored for 8 speakers. He doesn't designate where the speakers are supposed to be. The first time I performed it was in a parking lot with 4 speakers, and I emulated the locations by going in between the speakers. It also reflected on all the buildings outside the parking lot, so it was actually just quite amazingly spatial. And I sat in the audience. My only control was a volume knob, but I made sure to look very serious while I was doing that.
Very important.
Okay, so that brings me up to date. The other 2 things I did, which would be apparent if I had a slide, is I made the Erbe, right, which has extensive granular synthesis on one little part of one knob. All the reverb echoes are being broken up by granular delays, and what it gives you in effect is a room where the size of the room changes randomly. And in fact, it's not like the walls are moving. It's as if new walls are appearing and old walls are disappearing, but very quickly. And it gives this wonderful sort of shimmer effect. And after that, the Morphagene.
Oh, real quick, in case folks don't know, what would be the settings on the Erbe that would cause the effect that you're talking about?
You just take the depth knob and turn it clockwise past 12 o'clock. So from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, that's where you get the granular reverb. At the very end, there's another granular process, which is a granular pitch up, which does an octave up. And that gives you sort of the legendary Brian Eno shimmer effect.
Okay, and also it might be, will the speed settings make it more or less apparent?
The speed settings?
Mm-hmm. I've always felt like
the modulation speed.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, that was actually important. One of my goals for the Erbe was to do a piece called Lux Eterna, or to make a sound very similar to that, where it's just these, it's a liggity piece, very lovely sustained voices. And what I wanted the Erbe to do was to sort of feed back in a way, but then slowly change the delay time, so I'd get these different tones coming in and out. And once I get, I mean, that was the target for that. But if you turn the speed to very slow, it will slowly change from one delay time to another and give these different resonances. But very fast, yeah, it'll get very sort of shaky and specular.
Right, yeah. And that's also a strategy for eliminating oscillations too, right?
Yeah, but that was not really my point.
Okay.
No, I really wanted oscillations.
Yeah. Well, it does oscillate.
Yeah.
It does. It still oscillates, but I mean,
If you're on the verge of oscillation, you just turn that up. It'll cut a lot of volume. It'll make it sort of a nice natural reverb.
Right. Yeah, diffuse
with
it.
movable walls.
Yeah. You know, like just like home.
Yeah, just like home. Well, that's my presentation.
Yeah, right. Well, it's not. But actually, I would like to back up just a little bit because I think there was some things that you touched on that might be of interest. Get comments from Rich or Walker on. For example, I think one of the most interesting things you talked about. I didn't know this, but that Tenny wasn't allowed to publish a piece of music until the '70s. I mean, that's just kind of a crazy thing to think. Obviously, no one's going to purchase that and think that they got an Elvis Presley record and be upset, like, oh, I was buying an Elvis record. This isn't Elvis.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine the Colonel really wasn't appreciating
Right,
music
that's true.
credit, you know.
Right, that's true. Yeah, right, yeah. But that is a good point. They probably had no idea. Do you think did they know about it? Were they just concerned that they would get it?
I don't actually know the real story. I imagine that Jim just sort of thought, let's not try to do anything with this. And he probably used it, he probably did it in performance where he can get away with it.
Right. I mean, Elvis Presley was probably the most famous human being in the world at that point. So yeah, that's a good instinct probably. It's just interesting to think about. You know, here an artist made a piece and really felt like they couldn't publish it because of the existing laws or, I guess, interpretation of them. But now, I mean, would you think about something like that, Rich?
I don't know.
No, right? I mean,
My brain thinks about totally weird things. But, no, it's funny. I love that I'm sitting up here with Tom because Tom's been such a big inspiration for me over, I would say, ever since I got my Mac OS 9, going back to early days, right? When I first got SoundHack and was talking about some of these first, Convolution and, some of my first introductions to Granular Synthesis and Processing was through your software, actually. It's one of the first, it was a free application, SoundHack, back in the day. There was C-Sound, there was Super Collider, Max, but Max hadn't really, it was back in the opcode days. There wasn't really much you could do with Max, more than MIDI stuff, but getting SoundHack really opened my mind up to so many things. I'd used your program immensely on so many albums, and even the 2 plugins you showed. I was like, oh, I wish I had my laptop because I've got so many great presets that I made from those two plugins. But it's so I just have to thank this guy because I've gotten just a world of amazing stuff from all his creations, hardware and software.
So was Tom then your introduction to Granular, or had you learned about it in other places?
My first introduction to Granular was, I want to say, in the early '90s. It was on the Windows platform. It was a software program called Granular Lab. Granular Lab, was that what it was, Matt? We used. Granular. It was a PC application, and it was amazing. You could take any wave file. You had grain density, and you could pretty much just destroy a sound. You take like just a drum loop and create an 8-minute piece of music from just a simple 4-bar drum loop. And to me at that time, it was like a radical way of transforming sound. I was like,
What year was that?
Mid-90s?
Okay, mid-90s, okay.
92, 93, maybe somewhere around there. I mean, it was, I think it was a 66 megahertz computer we were using at the time, maybe less than that. I don't remember. It was a PC computer, right? Because I didn't start using Macs. I think the first Macs we used were the Mac Quadras. The Quadra was the first, and then things started moving to like, I remember using the Wall Street.
Oh, yeah.
You remember those? I was using your software on that MacBook for a while, but then for me, the introduction to the granular world was through software. There wasn't, and it was, eventually I started using granular stuff with Macs. Macs version 2, when MSP started, or the audio processing objects and stuff started to come into play, but I was just fascinated with this process, just being able to take the smallest bit of sound, right? Just the smallest chunk of sound, and generating almost like a new world of content from just the smallest bit of sound. And it's another thing that kind of relates to this is like when I went to Curtis Rhodes' house. I stayed at Curtis's place one time, who I'm a huge fan of, and that's what Curtis does. Curtis showed me, he was like, took a 4-second sample of some branches breaking, and he opens up emission control, his super collider patch, and created this beautifully ornate, detailed piece of music. To me, it sounded like this beautiful piece of music that was like 8 to 10 minutes long out of just 4 seconds of sound. This whole concept of time, of taking something and creating these beautiful textures, granulated textures and things that change and evolve, just with just the most minimal sound to me, just was such an amazing concept to me. And I remember discovering Curtis's stuff actually through his software. I was using Pulsar Generator on OS 9, one of his apps, and then from his app I went and discovered his music, and then from there I think Point Line Cloud, because we know Knott, we're good friends with this guy Knott, who runs Asphodel Records. He released an album of mine, and he also released Curtis's album as well. So I started digging in deeper, then I found out that he wrote these books, so I bought Microsound.
And what year, when did you read Microsound?
I can't remember how far back it was. I remember getting it like right when it came out. And I also Curtis's latest book that he just put out. Actually, I'm in one of the chapters. That's how he contacted me. But I was like, oh,
Composing electronic.
Composing electronic music. I was like, he had asked me, he was like, do you mind if you put me in the book? I was like, I'm too stupid to be in your book. I don't know if you'd want. But it was just amazing, studying his works and his techniques, and just the whole idea of it, the whole concept, I think is just really interesting. It's something that I even use today. I've always used it through every album of music I've released, and it's such a powerful composition tool. Especially if you're doing electronic music. Especially, I like to experiment in like electroacoustic music and music concrete, and even my piece. I guess the recursion mechanism piece is a music concrete piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is a music concrete piece. So, for those of you who don't know, I took inspiration actually from John Cage and David Tudor, which is where I was trying to recreate the rainforest composition that David Tudor had made a while ago using suspended sculpture pieces and spatialized sound, and like doing my own version of that piece, because that was such an inspiration to me when I first heard. I actually have it still on vinyl. I used to listen to it all the time, fascinated by, it sounded like you went to another planet, and you're like in an alien rainforest listening to these creatures. They're not from this planet, but you're hearing all these strange alien birds and insects and reptiles in a forest, creating this cacophony of sound. I was like, what if I tried to recreate that in my own style, with my own approach, using different the tools of today, but not having the composer at the controls, having the modular be the composer.
Okay.
So that was the basis for what the recursion mechanism was. But
before you go on, can you maybe, I think there's probably some people here who would be interested to know a little bit about
how you set it up, if you don't mind. Like, for example,
Yeah.
the control signal paths, the sound sources.
Exactly. I'm using actually a lot of tom stuff. Yeah, I'm using 2 Erbe verbs in the piece.
Okay.
Using two misgerons, 2 echophones as well.
Okay.
And 3 morphagenes.
3 morphagenes.
3 morphagenes
That's
for the
excessive.
piece. Yeah. I would have gone 4 if I had the time, but 3 seemed to be a good
Yeah, sure.
a right amount for the piece. But yeah, so I'm actually using sounds that I've recorded from the piece. There's actual physical objects, if you go in, that have contact mics that are being hit by these poly-in triggers. They're these mechanical triggers that pop out, and then I have a box where the modular is sending gates to those triggers, so they're actually physically hitting like a trash spiral cymbal. There's a water foam that's being hit by a trigger that's spinning on a rotating motor. And then on the other rotating motor is an Indian singing bowl, and in that singing bowl is draped in is a slinky coil that's attached to a mic stand really high. And then I also have a trigger hitting that also has a contact mic at the top. So you have these sort of physical suspended objects that get played by the modular, but they're also being recorded and being reprocessed into the modular.
So the recordings are happening live. These aren't on a SD card reel.
Well, two of them have SD cards. One Morphagene is doing processing.
Okay, so there's one live
Yeah, it's
recording and 2
Exactly.
And the sounds that are on the pre-recorded reels, where do they come from?
Those also came from the piece. So I did acoustic recordings of the water phone. I was hitting it with mallets and different things and bowing it, and then I made 2 custom reels of just all those sounds. So what you're hearing also in the piece is just those manipulated objects. You know, I went and did further computer processing and stuff to make it, but it's just so that the timbre and the sonic scape of the piece sort of all matches. You know, it's still heavily processed in bits, but the content source material is basically all derived from those.
And then as
those
a
pieces.
spectator, you also hear acoustically the sound as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I
So-
wanted actual, acoustic pieces to become part of the mix of what you're hearing in the spatialization in the room. It's very similar to the David Tudor piece. You know what I imagine. I wasn't there to experience it, but from the documentation of what I was studying about the piece, and from the recordings that I have of that piece, I was trying to create that atmosphere, but in my own way, putting my own little twist on it. Not really kind of copying it, but kind of taking the concept and putting a little spin on it. My own spin on it, so to speak. So, but yeah, I mean, the Morphagene plays. I mean, it's a huge part of the whole thing, and I'm doing some really interesting things where on those 2 reels, I have a real slow CV going into the organized input, so it's always. You could look at the indicators. It's like scanning through the samples the whole time, right? So I hit the play, and at different times I have the Wogglebugs hitting the play and I can't remember the other input I'm using, where I'm playing a sample, but you don't know what sample it's going to hit at any given time, right? So on those 2, you see this sort of they're kind of going opposite of each other, so there's kind of scanning through the reel, but it's kind of a gamble on what slice or what sample it's going to hit on. But I'm also hitting, I'm sending triggers very slow on the play input, so you don't, at any given time, you might hear something for like a split second, and that's getting panned to the rear or to the right or to, it's
I noticed some very compelling silences in the few minutes I was there.
There is, yeah.
Times where it went silent and bang, then it came.
Exactly, yes. I purposely did that because I didn't want the piece to be constantly, I didn't want there to be any sort of way, the listener to be able to pick up sort of any rhythm or, I wanted to break out of linear. I don't want anything to feel linear at all.
No meter whatsoever.
No meter whatsoever. That's why I decided to use 3 Wogglebugs as clocks. They're all independent of each other. They're not connected in.
And not synchronized in any way?
No. They're all running on their own time.
And let me ask you this: what about your echo phone? Was it completely unsynchronized?
Unsynchronized. Both of them.
Sacrilege.
Both of them. Yeah.
No synchronized, no beat synchronized delay lines.
For somebody who loves beat synchronization, no. I was like, I'm going to be anti as possible on this, and but it's a fun piece. Yeah, like for me, it's my first piece, and I've taken so much inspiration from music, concrete music. Like I feel like you can learn so much from that, from so many of those composers. Like I've studied so much of that music growing up, and I try to, like, every once in a while on my social media channels, I'll post things where I'm like, hey, check this out. Like the other night I posted the David Tudor piece, the Rainforest piece, the YouTube link. Like nobody cared. No one's just like, what is this garbage from 1960? Who wants to listen to that? I was like, well, no, actually, there's something interesting about this. The concept of it, you know, there's. I feel like some of the most interesting things happen in that kind of music, where there's like no rules. There's just like.
Well, also a piece like that, you need to really step into the live space and be surrounded.
You gotta experience it. You know what I mean? And it's. I feel like there's just so much you can learn from that music. I don't know. At least that's it for me. You know, I mean, people might have a vastly different opinion on that, but I've learned so much from that kind of music and those techniques and approaches, and kind of get out of your comfort zone. You know, that's why I wanted to do that for the 10-year. I was like, well, I want to do something different than just perform on a modular. I want to do something really, really outside of my comfort zone. You know, and pay homage to a little bit of the composers and music that really inspired me. How could I do something that could kind of, you know, be in spirit of that in a way? And I found it was really fitting that, you know, John Cage has been at his involvement with the Black Mountain College, because John Cage is a huge influence with me with all the Variation Series records and stuff, and you know, there's my pieces in that spirit too with all that. So it's I found that it was quite fitting to kind of have that tie-in to being a part of the history of all that. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't know.
I also really appreciate how, like Tudor, you're generating this piece from live electronics.
Live electronics.
It's
exactly.
not just all mediated by the computer.
By the computer, exactly. I wanted it to be exactly. I was just trying to recreate a modernized version of what he was doing. So,
and if I could segue in, I mean, that's kind of weird doing that quite often. You're talking about looking at history to find inspiration. I mean, that's something that we've done. I'm talking to Walker and Tom here. I mean, that's something that we're doing all the time. We're looking at history, looking back and seeing what were some of these techniques and interesting ideas that people had, and how can we expand on them or riff on them in a way. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing. It's keeping human lineage alive.
I bet that not only did, when you posted the Tudor piece, you may have thought nobody cared, but I bet there were 5 or 10 people out there who got their minds blown by it.
Probably, yeah. I have a couple comments because I occasionally late night. I do a thing sometimes on my Twitter called late night listening, and it's always like an electroacoustic composer. I'll do like a Jaunty Harrison piece, or you know, because I love like French electroacoustic composers to German to Canadian. But I get a lot of inspiration from electroacoustic music because it's just so free from.
Have you ever been to the Rehappening at the old Black Mountain College campus?
Never been.
They do it every year. We actually, Make Noise did a piece there with Revolve in what we call the John Cage Room.
Oh, okay.
This spring, we had 8 performers who were in 2 separate rooms, 2 at a time, 1 on each side. Okay. And they were responding to video feeds that were also pumped into the middle room, which was where people would hear the 2 performances juxtaposed. And we had a system that was actually it was a little bit like the system you're using for your piece, because we had 3 morphagenes in it that were constantly eating the sound from these performances, recycling them and spitting them out, mixing them with other sounds, and there was live microphones that were picking up everything people were doing in any of the rooms, talking or walking around. And it was really. And Meg was one of the performers there too, playing violin and singing.
Oh, that sounds good.
There was a woman who did a dance of sorts wrapped in paper.
Oh yeah.
Made some of the most incredible sounds.
Really?
Of the whole piece, yeah.
Did they record her performance?
Well, they have.
I would love to hear the sound.
I don't have recordings of the full performance, but I have a couple hours of what the system spit out. I've got some editing to do.
I'd like
we're
to
gonna
hear
release
that.
it sooner or later. Also, I believe that we're gonna repeat that performance at some point in some other space. I've been talking with Revolve about that.
I'd love to come check that out.
You should.
Let's do that. That sounds really cool.
Yeah. It was easily my favorite thing there last year. Yeah. Definitely.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, on that note, though, I do think it's important I do think it's absolutely important to have history in in mind with what you're
Yeah, I
doing,
think
which is
I think
really-
people forget,
Yeah.
and I forget. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
good to get reminded of those ideas, those people that I feel like a lot of people that follow me. I want to educate them to some point. Check this out. Yeah, sure. It was made 19.
Well,
You know.
you also can't just say, "Oh, I came up with this idea."
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
You didn't come up with that idea.
No.
You've been listening to this music. Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken it's like a combination of all these things. Like, I mean, I was telling Tony, and like, when I did my first Make Noise record, I told him, I was like, well, let's think of Todd Dockstader and Morton Subotnick, and we're in a room together tripping acid. This is what my record is going to
But
be.
that actually never happened.
Never been a conversation.
You did create something new, because I don't think those two guys ever took acid together in the same room. So you did something new.
Did something new, it's like, but
More than Todd, you think?
Tom was there. He was young.
I think I also referenced Drip City from Canadian composer. What's his name? My brain's. I'm going off.
Demont, Normago.
No, he built his own instrument.
Hewlett Cain's?
Hewlett Cain.
Hewlett
Hewlett Cain's Drip City was a
Drip
big
City.
inspiration.
That's actually an amazing record. Yeah.
That's an amazing record. Yeah, that was a huge influence on my record too, which a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, I
but
didn't know.
I have a lot of his music.
Uh-huh.
Because people always say, like, where does inspiration come from? Creature. I was like, it's actually from music from like 1960. Like, it's nothing that's even currently. I'm not listening to anything that's like in the current times that's made me do those decisions. I'm looking way back in history for ideas and things. Just like like you said, some of the coolest things I felt like that are happening, people have forgotten about.
Sure.
There were so many innovations during the 20th century in technology that also are able to kind of blow up the way you conceptualize music. And it happened so fast that not nearly all of the possibilities were explored at any given time. There's still so much to chew on from the last like 80, 90 years.
80, 90 years, yeah.
Right.
Especially with tape music, like some of the, do you know Dick Reimakers? Do you know this? Dick, he's from,
Yeah.
he has, if any of you guys get to check out his music, he did these tape works. I think it's called the Electronic Works, volumes 1 through 3, particularly volume 2. You guys can never get your hands on that CD. It's all tape splicing.
His name's spelled with a J in there.
Yes,
somewhere,
Dick
right?
Reimacher. I can't do it in the, the accent. Yeah, but if you get to check it out, that album will blow your mind. There are things that happen on that record where I don't even understand how they were created. And there's sounds and textures that I must have eaten mushrooms to that album like 100 times and still not figured out what's going on in that. And they're thinking like, and he wasn't using a computer. He wasn't using... It's just absolutely mind-blowing,
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I still can't figure it out.
Maybe you could remind me to check it out by posting it to your late night listening.
I will.
Soon.
Yeah, no,
Keep
if
an eye
someone
out
has
for
it up, it's not one of those things a lot of people listen to. I'd have to find it somewhere, or maybe post it up on myself without getting in trouble. I don't know if there's.
Oh,
I
right.
think there's a compilation of Dutch electronic music which has a number of those pieces.
On YouTube. Are they
Oh, not on YouTube.
Yeah, just they
Tom,
post
you
it up
talking about the
somewhere.
collection CDs, like kind of white cover, like the covers are kind of white.
Which one?
The collection of the electronic music
Dutch
you're talking about.
No, I don't know
Okay.
what the cover's like.
Okay.
Oh, the ones that the Dick Reimacher's album.
Yeah.
And I think it's like dark green or whatever.
Okay.
I have a 3D. It's a 3 CD set of it. But like even Todd Dockstader, I don't know if you guys listen to his music. You should check it out. Like,
Well, if you've watched cartoons ever in your life, you might have heard it.
But his tape works. Like Apocalypse is an amazing album. I don't know if you guys get to check that out. But if you're looking for really interesting tape music, that music will absolutely, still to this day, blows my mind away. Just with tape splicing and like what you could do with that. I mean, it's so organic, and I don't know. To me it sounds futuristic. Like I still can't do what he did on that record with the technology that I have today.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that and I'm like, I don't know how to do that. That's
He's a
amazing.
unique artist.
A very
Very
unique
creative.
artist, yeah. Amazing.
Walker, how did you get into Microsound? And also, actually, Well, first that. How did you get into Microsound and granular synthesis and tape music? Like, what's your earliest recollection of learning about it? Or
when I was a kid, I had some really cheap, like, or maybe probably free audio editors on my PC. That was they may have even been included. It was just like waveform display.
Cool Edit?
I definitely used Cool Edit.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was
I
the
used
first
that.
one,
Yeah.
but I would do like copying and pasting. Really,
Mm-hmm.
I would go down to tiny little single or less than a single waveform, less than a single cycle, or just a few cycles, and then copy and paste them, and then I didn't know there were tools that were made for that.
What year would this have been?
I don't know, 95, 96.
Okay. Well, yeah.
When I was,
You should have gone to the SoundHack website.
I know. I didn't. I don't think they had it on AOL.
Okay, so had you read about this or something?
No. I was just.
You were just experimenting.
I was just experimenting. I would also I would record stuff into the computer speaker and then change the sample rate. I would go into the options and change the sample rate and stuff. I didn't know what that meant. I'd be like, okay, 44,100. Let's do 22,050 because that's half what it is. And that was like my introduction to speeding up and slowing down.
Yeah, varispeed.
Sound, exactly.
Non-real-time varispeed.
All those. So basically, I was like using those as a word processor, and I didn't make anything with it that I was saving. I was just messing around. Actually, I did save them, but as files on that computer, which who knows where that computer is. I'll never hear them again. And I also would do things with. I was playing piano a lot as a kid, and I would write compositions for piano. And a long time I was writing them by hand, and then eventually I got this sort of this notation program, which was not Sibelius or Finale. It was like the version of that a mom would buy for their kid for his 12th birthday. And I would do stuff on that where I'd draw so many notes that like there was no way. It was kind of like what people do now. They call it black MIDI and stuff like that. I was doing that by clicking notes into the staff and the piano roll. Yeah, or no, it wasn't even a piano roll. It was actually like a staff with a treble clef and stuff. And I would add like 40 million ledger lines on top. And it starts to do the MIDI, like repeating up octaves and stuff. And I'd bring these to my piano teacher and be like, look what I wrote. And she's like, you can't play that. You have to write stuff that you can play. So I wrote stuff I could play, but I also would just mess around with that and I'd make like 128th notes at 400 BPM in my computer. I know how to handle it and stuff. So that was where I
That's cool.
And then later I got an MPC.
Yeah,
just
right.
like mess around with those.
That's
That was much later.
MPC, essentially music concrete machine,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like, you can't really. I mean, there's there's a chapter in Schaefer's book where I swear to God he's describing an MPC. He's talking about having a grid of buttons, but he's using lock groove records. It's pre-digital, pre-tape, really. He says these lock groove records he's made all these different sounds on, and he's talking about he needs some sort of grid of buttons where he could trigger each of the different records at different times so he could perform his piece. I mean, he's literally describing an MPC.
You know, all these really crazy, peculiar ideas on the fringe become the mainstream.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Right. It's true. Sooner or later, or we figure out, like as Walker was saying, like maybe at the time people couldn't figure out quite what to do with that idea or technology, and then as time passes, it becomes more apparent how you could use it. How you could use it to make music or maybe save lives, whatever it is. But yeah, definitely something. The other thing I'm always curious about is where do you draw the line? Is Black MIDI Microsound? Is Microsound music concrete? I've always felt like music concrete and Microsound go hand in hand personally. And Microsound is granular synthesis is just one process within Microsound. What do you? I know, Tom, you probably have some very strict opinions on that.
Well, I think these words are really the domain of people who are documenting this.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure. But also those who are trying to learn or trying to piece it together in their head.
Read Schaeffer's early writings. He's sort of defending what he's doing. I mean, it doesn't come off at first, but you realize he's saying, here's my new music theory involving sound. And it starts feeling like he's building a case for doing something different. And you imagine the people that are surrounding him and saying, oh, this is not music. But
and this is like academics in his field or something?
Or people going to his concert and walking out of his concert eventually has to say, oh, well, what I'm doing is music concrete. You know, this is the thing. So putting giving a word, him able to name what he's doing, gives him some control over it, some protection, you know.
Sure, that makes sense.
Schaefer's book seemed like he was starting with a concept and then trying to find the realization of it. That was what I.
The whole thing reads like that. He's just
it was like,
stumbling
I want to
about.
make a concrete music. How can I do that?
Well, if you read, it seemed like his job was just maybe really boring, and he had a lot of time to think about it because it's like I guess he was, just had time to imagine this stuff because there was really no commercial viability for what he was dreaming of doing, especially even more so back then. Really, I mean, it was really built to fail at that time. So, but you still didn't answer. Does Microsound encompass Black MIDI, for example? In your opinion? You don't care.
Yeah. I think these are, Microsound's a word that Curtis Rhodes uses to describe a certain number of things. I don't know if he coined it, but I respect that he can write a book and collect a whole bunch of different material and talk about it from the perspective of his ideas of Microsound. But it's these words are sort of a way of formulating an argument or a context that you can talk about them.
You don't think that they're useful for educating people?
Well, you could say, well, here's Black MIDI, but the problem with saying Microsound is you often get a lot of people then saying, well, that's what I'm going to do. And instead of innovating and making new, interesting music with no definition, they make sort of another version of it. Becomes derivative. So for me, I don't really like the titles.
Okay, all right.
But that's mine.
And Walker, you have something?
Well, I've begun to sort of think of sounds of any length that's like all the same material, and I would actually go down to things where we control signals and CV and gates that we use in a modular, or more like larger concepts that are much longer than a note. Even though they're not technically sound, I started to think of them as sound as well. One of my influences was Hank Shockley of the Bomb Squad, who made all the music for Public Enemy, and he had some interesting things to say about how when they would take several different records and things and styles and layer them on top of each other, and the sounds that were coming from the relations between different sounds that were layered on top created something that was coming from outside of the sound that was actually originally there. I had a quote that I wanted to pull up from my computer. He says, when two sounds are put together, they create subharmonics, and the subharmonics, in this case, I think he'd be talking about things that are rhythms that are below the surface of the sound that is coming from each of the two sounds. Two sounds colliding together create a third sound. Rhythms collide to create new rhythms. The mix radiates back to the listener. They probably did not feel the individual samples. The astute might recognize some of the samples, but even they were feeling this other vibration created by the collision of sounds. I don't remember how I was connecting that to the question.
Well, no, it doesn't matter. It's a beautiful quote, and it definitely makes me want to think about music.
It's funny. It made me think about it's this thing I like to do where I take two sounds. Any of you guys know RX by Isotope? That software. It's basically audio restoration software. There's a little thing I like to do in there. There's a function called Spectral repair, where it basically takes an ambience. Say you get somebody who coughs or something in a recording, and you want to remove that. Tools to use Spectral repair. You can do ambience match. There's all kinds of cool tools in there. But there's a thing I like to do. It's kind of like what you're talking about. So I'm abusing the program to do what it's not really meant to do. But I love doing that kind of stuff with everything. So I'll take a bunch of field recordings that are unrelated to each other, sounds of all kinds of stuff, and then I insert silence into all these back-to-back recordings of stuff. And then I will spectral repair two different pieces of material that have nothing, they're not related to each other. So what it does is it tries to correct it analyzes the audio before it and after it. CMO, safe trip home, bro. takes the audio, analyzes audio before it and after it, and it tries to correct and spectrally pair the two sounds that don't have anything to do with each other. So what's interesting is what it tries to correct.
So it's a little bit like some of the things that Tommy plays, actually, right?
Yeah, it's similar.
We're trying, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like taking two sources and then trying to create a new source between that. But it's.
Are we out of time?
What?
I saw Kelly making
Right,
that.
no, you can finish, please.
Oh yeah, no, but it's that quote made me think of that. Using tools and abusing things in ways that they were not intended to be used to come up with new sounds, and that just made me think about this. I do weird things like that all the time.
If I could just make one counter comment to Tom's.
Oh, yes.
He doesn't like these labels he's saying, but I'm saying I'll tell you why I like them. I wouldn't consider myself so much a musician as more a designer and as someone trying to create instruments for musicians to play. Coming up with concepts and applying names to them, it gives me something to work toward, and it also, I feel like, puts a framework into something that could potentially inspire someone to, for the lack of a better word, hack that framework. So if you say something is East Coast or West Coast or No Coast or Microsound or all of these things, to me it's like inviting the user, the end user, the artist. It's like inviting them to defy me as like the person who's designed the module, or Walker, the person who's created the education and documentation and video for it. We're explaining these things to you and giving you all these nice words and descriptions and holding your hand as we take you down the path of like how to use the Morphagene. And now we're inviting you to defy us. And if we didn't lay that framework down, what would you be defying? You would have nothing to rebel against. That's. I hate to end it there.
That could be continued at the engineering section.
Sure.
I got the designer.
Well, and some arm wrestling later tonight.
I don't think you're at a disadvantage.
Nah, I got it. This is
already.